Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my updated guide for the Rise of Adventure Lands node. So, let's get into it. So, per the usual, I imagine that some of you are just here to see my deck picks, so I'm going to go ahead and show those off, and then I'm going to go ahead and get into the node and how I would build around it if you can't build my decks, or if you just wanted an explanation for why I chose what I chose. So, this is very much a Nissa node, so if you're a newer player to the game, I would go with something kind of like this deck right here. And then if you have a more established collection or more planeswalkers, I would use Nissa of Shadowed Bows, and I would use something more like this deck right here. All right, what is this node? What are we in for? So for the Adventure Lands node, we need to win the fight. We need to match 24 or more gems of our planeswalkers' colors with swaps during the fight. And we need to summon 3 or more land supports during the fight. Now be careful with the identity. You need to make those matches with swaps. So you have to actually manually make those swaps, which means that you're going to want to make sure that you don't go overboard and overload the battlefield and wipe out your opponent before you're able to achieve your objectives. The permanent support for this particular node is going to have landfall for each of the colors. So landfall is when you make a match of 4 or more gems of that color. So if you landfall white, you're going to disable the first enabled opposing creature until the beginning of your next turn. If you landfall blue, you're going to drain 5 mana from your opponent's hand. If you landfall black, the first opposing reinforced creature is going to lose a reinforcement. If you landfall red, you're going to do 2 damage to the first opposing creature. And if you landfall green, you're going to create 3 insect tokens. Now, each of those effects can trigger 1 time per turn. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, what if I'm up against some kind of Urza deck that is going to make crazy blue landfalls and drain all the mana from my hand. At the very most, they're just going to drain 5 mana from your hand at a time. Now, matching the gems is really just a product of you taking turns to match the gems, and ideally you having some gem conversion that's going to make it so that there will always be matches for you on your turn in your colors. Now, this also makes it so that for the summoning 3 or more land supports, that those 2 objectives are going to go hand in hand, because many of the land supports that we have are going to convert gems for us, and they're going to convert gems ideally to the colors of our planeswalker's color identity. So you do want to make sure that you are doing that. Now, for my deck for newer players, right, you're going to notice a few of the things in here that I'm going to be suggesting that you keep an eye out for as you're building your deck for this node. The first of those things is to keep an eye on some of these cards that you have with landforming. Landforming is a mechanic from the recent Zendikar set, and it's going to make it so that if you make a horizontal gem match on the turn that you play that card with landforming, then you're going to get the effects of the card, and you're also going to get a land support that enters the battlefield. Keep in mind that landscape down here on the bottom requires us to summon 3 or more lands. We don't have to cast them. So if we cast a bunch of cards with landforming, then the lands that are produced from landforming cards are indeed going to go ahead and enable us to get lands on the battlefield. Other cards that are really helpful to keep an eye out for are cards like Cultivate, which not only is going to convert gems to your planeswalker colors, but it's also going to fetch the first land card from your library and give it mana. So this is going to enable you to boost your board state. It's going to put more gems onto the battlefield that are your planeswalker's colors, which should ideally make it easier over the long haul to achieve that identity objective, and it's also going to help you with that landscape. There are a lot of cards that are going to be able to fetch lands for you and put them onto the battlefield, but one of the more easily accessible ones is this Migratory Greathorn. This one's more easily accessible because it has a full art version from Fiblathip that was out once upon a time, and then there's also this version, just the regular art version. But it's going to have Mutate, which means that you can, if you have another non-token creature on the battlefield at the time of you casting this, you can choose to mutate it onto that other creature, and then every time, when you mutate it and every time that you cast another copy of that creature, you're going to fetch the next land support from your library and put that card directly into play under your control. Now, there are quite a lot of cards right now in current standard that are going to help us get lands. So some of the things you can do is you can just go ahead, toggle all of our different standard sets. Yes, I would love to see a standard toggle. That would be amazing, but alas, we do not have that. And you can go ahead and look at some of the cards that have land in them, right? The keyword land. Now, I'm only going to go ahead and point out a few of them, but we've already gone over land forming, so pretty much anything like Turntimber Symbiosis, anything that's going to have land forming is going to count. But the few that I want you to definitely keep your eyes out for in the event that you have them, one of them is Avatar of Growth. Yes, I know that this is a masterpiece, but when this creature enters the battlefield, on top of converting gems to green, it's also going to fetch the first 2 land supports from your library and put them directly into play. This is going to achieve 2/3 of the landscape objective just for playing 1 copy of this card. If you have secured this card in your collection, I would say that this is almost a must-use for this particular node. It's very, very good. I would strongly advise that you use it. Card like Yasharn is also going to be amazing because this is going to be fetching up to 2 different cards with land forming from your library. So if you have Yasharn, this is going to enable you to get a whole bunch of cards that are going to, at the very least, be able to produce lands. We've also got Escape to the Wilds. This is another fantastic option because it's going to draw cards and then it's going to give all the lands in your hand full mana. So this is going to really help you with that landscape objective in that not only is it going to fill up your hand, but it's going to help you go ahead and cast some of the lands that you might wind up drawing on top of the effect. As you go, you'll see there are other things. I've already pointed out the Migratory Greathorn. That was one of my primary suggested cards. But as for, I know I wasn't going to mention too much in the way of land forming, but if you do wind up choosing to go away from green, Hagra Mauling is an absolutely phenomenal choice because this serves as both removal and lands at the same time, which is really going to give you a massive, massive boost as you play. So those are some of the cards that I would keep an eye out for in your collection. If you don't have them, things like Cultivate are going to be good because Cultivate is going to serve as gem conversion and it's also going to fetch lands. And there are other things kind of like Cultivate. The Omen is not currently showing up here, but the green Omen, I'll pull up in just a moment for you, is also going to serve a very similar purpose as Cultivate does. Let's just go ahead and pull up the green Omen. It's because I didn't have supports, but the green Omen is also going to go ahead and convert gems, and then when it's destroyed, you get to fetch one of the first 2 lands. However, because this is converting gems to your Planeswalker colors, meaning that you're going to have green in your color identity in order to be able to use this card, no, you should not use a colorless walker. In the event that you've gotten this far and you've been thinking of using Karn, don't do it. You need to match 24 or more gems of your Planeswalker's colors. Karn doesn't have a color. Don't use a colorless Planeswalker. Right, so otherwise your Planeswalker has to have green. So when this support gets matched, because it has only 1 shield, it's going to break, and when it breaks, you're going to go ahead and be able to fetch lands. So we really have a lot of cards that enable this, and so it makes it a lot easier to get this objective. I would actually argue that of the 2 different nodes between having a full party and then the lands node is kind of like a freebie in order for getting the points, because even with my free-to-play account, I found that it's pretty easy to achieve that objective. At least it has been for me in this event. Now, if we were to analyze the rest of the deck here that I am running for you newer players, we've already gone over the Greathorn, we've gone over Cultivate, we've gone over the Colony Ambush. Reclaim the Wastes is going to serve as gem conversion, but it's also going to fetch cards with land forming. So it's just going to help you with not only matching, but lands. So it's going to help you with both of your objectives. We've got the Conclave Naturalists in the deck. This is a phenomenal card. It's going to enable you to destroy any kind of support that's not a Vanguard. So this is great because it's going to destroy your opponent's lands. It's going to destroy if your opponent is a cruel, cruel, evil person and running the Prismatic Bridge here. It's going to go ahead and get rid of the bridge. So it's going to be able to get rid of a lot of the really baddies that you might encounter. Dwynen is just a solid creature. I'm running it in here just for newer players. If you have something better, something like Woodland Baloth or Behemoth or whatever it's called, it's the Origins Mythic, is a phenomenal option for you newer players. I know it's a Mythic. I was considering putting it in, but I'm not a Bellower. I wasn't going to put it in just because, it's a Mythic. But this is going to move the next green creature from your library to hand and give it mana, which means that you can use it instead of Dwynen to get either a Conclave Naturalist to destroy more supports, a Migratory Greathorn to get more lands, or another Baloth, which is going to get you more Greathorns or Naturalists. So it's going to do a lot of goodness for you. For the lands that I chose in this deck, I chose both Gingerbread Cabin and the Skemfar Elderhall. If you have Castle Garenbrig or the World Tree, I would suggest that you use those instead. You could also go ahead and use the Pathways. The Pathways are phenomenal land choices for this node because if you use the land forming, they count as summoning 2 lands at the same time because you get 2 lands out, one for playing the Pathway and one for the land forming, so that's another excellent option. And then Binding the Old Gods is a really cool removal card for this particular node because it's going to destroy your opposing creatures and is going to ignore things like hexproof. But then the second chapter of this is going to fetch the first land support from your library and just put it directly into play under your control. So not only will this serve as removal, but it's also going to help you get those lands out. The final card that I'm running in this particular deck is Lead the Stampede. This is in here so that you can more reliably fetch your creatures and play them. The more reliably that you're able to get your creatures, the more reliably you're going to be able to kill your opponent, and that's always a good thing, at least in my books. So that's why I'm running this particular deck. There are a number of cards that you can definitely swap out. If you have, for example, Turntimber Symbiosis, I would swap out Lead the Stampede for Turntimber Symbiosis. If you have the Baloth that I was talking about, or if you have Avatar of Growth, then go ahead and swap out Dwynen for the Baloth. If you've got Avatar of Growth, swap out the Migratory Greathorn. So there's a number of different ways that you can go ahead and put this deck together and just tweak it and make it a little bit better based on what you have in your collection. Now, for people with more complete Planeswalker or card collections, I would strongly advise that you use Nissa of Shadowed Bows for this particular node. All 3 of Nissa's abilities, Shadowed Bow, Bitter Connection, and Reclaim Zendikon, all 3 of those abilities make land tokens. So the Shadowed Bow token is an emblem land. The Hissing Quagmire from Bitter Connection is an emblem land. And the Reclaimed Zendikon token is, you guessed it, an emblem land. So not only is Nissa of Shadowed Bows going to be able to complete the landscape objective for you on her own, but she's going to be converting gems to her own colors, which is going to make it so that she can pretty much complete the identity objective on her own also. She makes it so that you can just run whatever deck is going to best fit for this particular node for you, and she's going to be able to enable you to take care of both the objectives with what she has. You'll notice that the cards that I'm using in this are pretty much the cards that I suggested earlier in terms of running cards with land forming between Yasharn and the Avatar of Growth, Reclaim the Wastes, and Turntimber Symbiosis, but then I've just thrown in some more removal cards because removal is important and some more card advantage. So I'm running Ruinous Ultimatum because it is the best removal card in Standard. I'm running Mythos of Nethroi because this is arguably the second best removal card in Standard in that it only costs 8 mana, it's non-targeted. Nissa is a green planeswalker, so you're going to be making green matches to get that adamant pretty easily, and so you're going to fairly easily get the 2-for-1 that you're going to want for destroying your opponent's creatures and destroying their supports. Furthermore, if your opponent is playing something like Prismatic Bridge, that thing costs 20 mana. This thing, since it destroys the support with the highest cost, is probably going to get rid of that, but at the very least, it's going to get rid of all the particularly nasties that you might come up against. So just keep that in mind. The last card in here is Nissa's Revelation. This one you can swap out. This is the easiest card to swap out from the deck. You can swap it out for Shadow Spear. You can swap it out for your own Prismatic Bridge. You can swap it out for pretty much anything. But the reason why I'm running Nissa's Revelation in this deck is for the life gain. I find that it's really nice in these coalition events to have some kind of life gain in your deck, just in case you go up against something that hits you pretty hard. It lets you come back from that a little bit more easily. Now, there's one other piece of really cool synergy that I wanted to point out in this deck, which is with the Ancient Green Warden. I actually really like this card. It wound up being one of my favorite cards from the most recent Zendikar set, and that's because it has this: when a land enters the board under your control, convert 6 gems to your Planeswalker's colors. This effect can trigger up to 3 times per turn. Now, this is really cool because all of Nissa's abilities are going to make lands, so if you've got the Green Warden down and you use any of her abilities, it's going to immediately convert 6 gems on top of whatever else the ability itself does. If you play an Avatar of Growth, both of those lands are going to come into play, and they're both going to convert 6 gems to your Planeswalker colors. And then finally, that last sort of low-key bit of really cool synergy that this provides is at the beginning of combat on your turn, return the first land support from your graveyard to the board under your control. which is going to make it so that if we're using something like Realms Uncharted, which lets us pick 2 of the first 4 lands or cards with landforming from our library and destroy the others, if we just choose to take the Turntimber Symbiosis, because that's the only card with landforming I have, and we let all of the Castle Garenbrigs just go straight to the graveyard, then our beautiful Turntimber is going to be bringing all of those Castle Garenbrigs back slowly but surely for free and giving me that landscape objective. So this deck is the deck that I have run every single time for this particular node. It is actually the deck that made me feel very strongly that Nissa of Shadowed Bows is 100% without a doubt an S-tier Planeswalker. And so if you run this deck, I'm sure that you will be able to find that you absolutely sweep through this particular node. Now, just keep in mind, it is very easy to get to that point where you've gotten too big of a board state if you let yourself accelerate too quickly. So do make sure that you don't play this deck too quickly and you do match those 24 or more gems. The summoning the lands, you don't even need to think about. It just happens. There's no reason for you to consider that objective with this particular deck. But the matching of gems through swaps, you definitely want to keep an eye out for. So keep those things in mind as you play. Hopefully this guide has been helpful for you in building your decks and preparing yourself for Rise of Adventure. I hope that you're able to attain perfection yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.